Welcome to Tritiyo Matra. COVID-19 is now planet-wide, but it is hitting at different speeds and intensely depending on where you live. Never in our lifetime has the world faced a challenge of this magnitude. The global impact of COVID-19 has accelerated dramatically. It has already claimed more than 500,000 lives. The outbreak of pandemic COVID-19 has disturbed the political, social, cultural, religious and financial structures all over the world. Sun Tzu, a Chinese military strategist, on his book, The Art of War, emphasized that if you know your enemy and know yourself, you need not to fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. My guest for tonight from USA, Professor Dr. Ali Riaz. Ali Riaz is a distinguished professor of political science at Illinois State University and a non-resident fellow of the Atlantic Council in USA. He previously was a public policy scholar of the Woodrow Wilson International Center of Scholars. And from Germany, Mr. Marc Saxer. Marc Saxer heads the Asian department of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. Previously, he worked in the APS regional office in India and Thailand, and he coordinated the project Economy of Tomorrow in Asia. Marc's research work focuses on social transformation and democratization processes. Professor Ali Riaz and Mr. Marc Saxer, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Let me start with Dr. Ali Riaz. How COVID-19 can impact world order, and do you think COVID-19 has accelerated the transition to a more fragmented world order? Dr. Riaz.
Thank you, Zilur. It's a pleasure to be with you. Let me try to put this conversation in three pieces, so to speak. First of all, what do we know? Definitely, we do know that the COVID-19 has impacted everybody, as you have said in the introduction. So that is where we should begin. What do we know? The second element, that what do we don't know at this point. And third, of course, is what are the scenarios that we can expect. The future part, let us keep it aside. At this moment, what do we know? We know for sure that the global economy has suffered very badly. Economic activities has pretty much stalled at this point. Supply chain has in the severest strain. Trade has slowed, investment has stalled, and definitely the economic recovery is not going to be too soon. So that is the economic part. The United States, as for the global politics, has failed miserably, not only to contain the virus inside the United States, but most importantly, it has been pushed aside from the global stage. COVID-19 has not done that, but it has accelerated the process. There is no doubt that the United States position was already dwindling to a certain extent, and the influence was getting smaller and smaller, less influential, but COVID-19 has accelerated that process. What also helped this process is the unilateralism that has been pursued by the Trump administration. The United States, interestingly enough, if I may, that previously the United States has been hated, criticized, never been pitied. This is the situation where United States has become an object of pity. That is the second element. Third, China, which has been rising as an economic force for the last decade, now is using this chaotic situation to extend its sphere of influence that we can see, especially where there are weak spots. Weak spots means where the United States and other Western nations are either absent or have been negligent. In terms of Europe, Mark would be in a better position to talk about it, but let me put just one single sentence here. The structural division between, say, Northern and Southern Europe has widened. The fifth point, the borders have now become more important, more pronounced. Previously, we were talking about borderless world, but not only in terms of physical border, the nationalist ideology, xenophobic ideology has become more obvious, and it has spread like wildfire. Democracy has come under stress. It has been under assault for a decade, but now the COVID-19 has given this opportunity for authoritarian governments everywhere, from Europe to Asia and elsewhere, that we have seen they are capturing the power, grabbing what we would describe as executive aggrandizement. That is happening. At this point, I don't see a clear standard bearer of democracy. And the last one that I would say, that the multilateral institutions, such as World Health Organization, didn't perform well. Although I don't agree with Mr. Trump, the way he is criticizing the World Health Organization, his allegations in many ways are actually trying to divert attention from his failings. So these are the things we know for sure, that these are the things, at least in my mind, these are the things that have happened. So what do we not know at this point? What is there is beyond our knowledge? The first of the thing that has been asked, is it the end of Pax Americana? I mean, of course, empires at one point do get to a position that they lose their influence. If we go back to 19th century, it was the Britain. If we go back to 18th century, France dominated the global scene. 17th, it was the Dutch. So we can go back all the way up to 15th or 14th century. But the point is that by 1935, the United States started to emerge as a global hegemon, and it created an world order. That seems to be the one, at this point, a matter of question whether it has ended. Second thing that we don't know, what is that? It is larger than just the demise or waning of the United States. Is it liberal internationalism? And is it the end of the liberal internationalism? Because liberal internationalism is based on expanding trade, increasing globalization, under a system what we can call the West-centric norms and values. Is it now going to be somehow losing the ground? And the third point is what we have seen in case of United States, which came together under the presidency of Mr. Trump, is the relative economic decline of the United States, rise of the China, and the real about power politics. But most importantly, this decline that we have seen is a long term, but it has accelerated under Mr. Trump. Will it actually reversed after November 3rd if a Democrat comes to White House? Will that change? We don't know. Will there be a Democrat in the White House post, November 3rd, that is January 20th, 2021? We don't know. We don't know where will this regional power games end. The rise of, for example, Turkey, rise of Iran, and in case of South Asia, the effort of the India, where will it end? How does it influence the regional global dynamics there? The final point is that I want to bring is the vaccine. We know we are in an uncertain time. There will be a vaccine. To my understanding, the Russians have claimed that they have already started distributing a vaccine. They claim that they have a vaccine. Of course, there are other companies with the support of the United States, Germany, and all other countries in the West. They are trying to have this vaccine as soon as possible. But the point is, how will it be distributed? Will the money talk? Will the power talk? Or will there be something else? We don't know. So these are the two sets of things that I see. One is the known thing, one is the unknown thing. These are the dynamics that is going to shape influence.
Professor, how intense can social... Professor Ali Riaz, how intense can social and political exclusion be due to COVID-19? Any example, very briefly?
No, I mean, there is an exclusion. If you look at the United States, since I live in the United States, you see the COVID-19 has pretty much unraveled the U.S. society in the sense that it has shown the long-standing structural, marginalization of the black community, of the Hispanic community, and other communities, the people of color. And it is similar elsewhere too. I mean, and politically speaking, when I'm talking about the assault on the democracy, it has been the case that the power of the people have been taken. The authoritarian regimes have been trying to take away the power from the people. So these exclusion, both social and political, and then you have this economic situation. Again, the long-standing structural elements of the global economy, the neoliberal economy, which has produced this marginalization, which has produced this disparity, has now been laid bare. So we'll see that we already have seen that the COVID-19 has created, or at least exposed, definitely it has exposed this, and this should continue in the near future unless there is a major shift in the global economic system, and to a certain extent the nation state takes the lead in this.
Okay. Mr. Marc Saxer, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected international politics and caused tensions, as Professor Riaz said, worldwide. It is times of crisis that tend to test political theories harshly, but also often exemplify and cement them. Will the COVID-19 impact change the impression of the USA in the international economic and political atmosphere? And will COVID-19 reduce global reliance on China? Marc.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's difficult to go after Professor Riaz because he has actually addressed pretty much all the aspects of the crisis already. I like very much what you said in the beginning, Zilor. You said it accelerated some trends. I think that's it's important to understand that a lot of the trends that we have been talking about here have been going on for a couple of years already, and COVID-19 is actually now pushing into these trends. I see two, and I would like to make a conclusion from them. One of them is more geoeconomic, and the other one is geopolitical. As you've mentioned, there has been a conflict over global dominance, global hegemony between the United States and China. We have all witnessed the things that have been going on the surface, the trade war, obviously, the finger pointing at the China virus. Now we've seen the closure of the consulates and so on. We have seen intense competition over the question of the 5G infrastructure, telecommunications networks. But there's also a lot of stuff going on underneath the surface. Chinese investment is starting to be blocked in Europe and the United States. We see that the takeover of companies are being blocked, and we see that there are different IT stacks. So basically, the technology is being separated. So what we see in conclusion is that the US and the Chinese economy have started to decouple, and the US is putting intense pressure on its European and Asian allies to follow suit. So what you see is that the global supply chains are being shortened and are partly disrupted and are being broken up. And now COVID-19 is actually accelerating this trend because the global supply chains are being disrupted anyway. So a lot of companies have to ask themselves the question, if the crisis is over, do we stay or go back to China? So the first trend that I see is a certain deglobalization trend, not in the sense that globalization completely collapses, but I think we have seen already the peak of globalization, and the world economy is falling into certain blocks, trade blocks. Mm-hmm. The second trend is closely related to that, and that is an intensification of geopolitical rivalry between the great powers. China and the US I have mentioned. Obviously, Russia needs to be in that list. We also see that other great powers like Brazil, India, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia are no longer willing to accept the guidance of a superpower pattern. So we see an intensification of geopolitical conflict, which may again lead to a breakup into zones of influence. So these two trends taken together, I think will be the framework in which global politics is operating over the next decade. we see, as Professor Riaz had mentioned, that the liberal world order that was built after the Second World is under extreme stress. The US, who is the hegemon and the guarantor of this world order, is actually actively putting the axe to its institutions. Think about the World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, the entire nuclear and weaponry armament contracts. You see the Paris Agreement under stress. So the international order is under extreme stress, and you see intense rivalry between great powers. And within that, Europe, but also the smaller and middle powers in Asia will have to lay their course.
Marc, do you think the clearest immediate term outcome of COVID-19 will be the escalation of tensions between the US and China, and how is it going to affect the EU's position in international politics? Marc?
What position? Say it again. I didn't understand. What position?
How is going to affect the EU's position in international politics? Regarding, I was talking about US and China's the tensions between the US and China.
The US position. Well, basically, the US is basically now pulling the strings of its alliances. I think that is still the greatest difference between the two, that there is still a network of alliances, which is somewhat ironic because Trump is really trying to destroy that with everything that he has. But you will see that there is pushback against the Chinese initiatives pretty much all across the board. I think that is being orchestrated by the US. You see that the US is putting pressure on Korea to pay more of the troops there. You see that Pakistan had trouble securing an IMF grant. You see the intense pressure on the so-called Five Eyes when it comes to sharing intelligence information in the debate over the 5G network. So the US has a lot of leverage and is actually using this in order to bring its allies into the fold. In that sense, I think we should not really talk about linear development here. I think these narratives that we see China overtaking the US are premature. I would also not yet talk about a new Cold War, but we're certainly heading into a direction there. So I think for Europe, for instance, it will be crucial to determine their path. Do we want to be part of a camp, or do we like to have some sort of autonomy between the blocs? As a German, actually I reside in Berlin. I can tell you that we have absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose from a new Cold War and a new disruption of the global community. So I think the logic of bipolarity is something that, from a German perspective, we really reject.
Okay. Professor Ali Riaz, the COVID-19 pandemic can influence the balance of power and change geopolitics. It accelerates and amplifies previously latent geopolitical trends. So how the COVID-19 pandemic is reshaping geopolitics, and how the great power competition can change the geopolitical environment of developing countries?
There are two things. Let me pick up from where Marc left with respect to the Cold War, or the new Cold War that many are predicting. I am in agreement with Marc that we might not be witnessing the typical Cold War that we have seen previously in post-1945 throughout until 1990s, the beginning of 1990s. But the tension that has been generated between the United States and China is going to intensify, and to a certain extent, Europe would be in the middle of this. And in many ways, it depends on the U.S. role. And this is where what I see is this unknown part. What role the United States would play, say, post-January 2021, meaning if there is a Democratic candidate, Mr. Biden wins and he's in the White House, how the United States is going to play. The stress that has been put on by Mr. Trump on the Atlantic Treaty, for example, NATO, or the cooperation between Europe and the United States, is the relationship is intensely under the intensely stressed. Let me put it this way. If that continues, at what point that is going to get into a breaking point? At what situation it would be a breaking point? Is it going to be in a breaking point? I'm not anticipating it is going to be in a breaking point, but the relationship would continue to be strained. And that's why, despite the fact that there won't be a typical Cold War, but the tension would continue. Why this would continue is the second answer to this, which brings Zelur, your point on the developing nations. Mm-hmm. We are not only witnessing a stressed and strained relationship between China and the United States. Unfortunately, the United States is not exactly standing on behalf of multilateral engagement. It is not standing on behalf of the democracy. However, China is actually offering an alternative ideology to the liberal order that we have seen since 1945. That liberal order is challenged not on Europe. To a certain extent, we have seen in some of the countries in the Europe departing from Hungary, Poland, cases in point, but it will be played out in the developing countries. What you, Zelur, you have described as developing countries, mm-hmm. because A, China's deep pockets, second, China's, I would say, somewhat aggressive posturing. Aggressive not only in South China Sea, but also aggressive in terms of its economic might, how they want to influence. We are already witnessing that one in South Asia. So it is not the COVID, despite the fact that we keep on talking about COVID-19, I am of the opinion that COVID-19 has not created anything. What we are witnessing is the acceleration. It could have been taken a decade. Now the COVID has practically accelerated into 10 months, because we don't know when it is going to end. And all the orders that we have seen already was fragile. Now it is started to brittle. And this is where the developing countries, whether they would actually buy into this new ideology, mm-hmm. which is very much authoritarian, very much into this, the Chinese idea of the economic development first, democracy, or the human rights later kind of argument. Also, they want to change the global order tilted towards this. That's why what I always say, that China is an emerging hegemon, and anyone is in the opinion or in this illusion that China is a benevolent hegemon. It's not. China is not a benevolent hegemon. Its posturing in South China Sea clearly shows that one. Hence, the battle to a certain extent, the ideological battle, and this mm-hmm. is where I say that whether it is the end of liberal internationalism, that is what the question is here. Whether we are witnessing this shift. This is a question. I have a different opinion whether it would end. I'm not sure that this is going to end, because there are hundreds of other reasons that I can show you that why it would not end. But Chinese emergence and ideological position of China has put this liberal internationalism into question. And that is what the China's success is so far. But I'm not saying that China is going to win this battle in the long run. That I agree with Marc, that it is premature. It is very, very premature to say that China is going to be the global hegemon, which is going to create a new global order. But they will keep on irritating. They will keep on pushing. They will keep on doing that one. A decade ago, 5 years ago, China wouldn't have done it. China might have waited, or would have, and if the COVID-19 was not there, they might have to wait for a few more years or a decade. But it has accelerated. It has given the opportunity to China, and that is what I see as the immediate future. But that's the immediate future, not necessarily a long-term one.
Professor Riaz, in which way the economic effects of COVID-19 would affect the pace of forced modernization?
See, the whole notion of the globalization came with this modernization paradigm and everything. What we saw in this neoliberal economy and the globalization, the way globalization expanded, meaning that the modes of globalization. One thing COVID has told us, we knew it, but it is now in our face kind of situation, that the typical pattern of globalization, which put profit first, and which has completely ignored the inclusiveness of the whole thing. Justice, for example, is another thing that has been completely ignored. That needs to be changed. Now, the point is, will it be better? Mm-hmm. I hope it will be better. I cannot guarantee you that it will be better. So this economic strain, this neoliberal economy needs to be, in a sense, the typical neoliberal economic ideas, that is the Reaganomics, the Thatcherite ideas, which has put everything in the private sector and the state withdrew from the social services. And now we see that one, even in case of Mr. Trump, the other day when he was talking about the payroll tax, which is basically for the social security, he inserted one sentence that in future the social security will be gone. But the point is that these neoliberal economic ideas and the model has not succeeded. Mm-hmm. We knew it's not going to succeed. We knew that it has created strain. We knew it has created disparity. It has actually created a group of very small rich people, class. That is going to be changed. But that does not necessarily mean that the globalization is going to be completely abandoned. I don't think that is the case. And that is the point that I said, the third thing, I said, what do we know, what we don't know? Mm-hmm. And the third thing is, what do we anticipate is going to happen? There are scenarios we can talk about. Mm-hmm. But insofar as the economy is concerned, I am not yet convinced that the complete globalization idea is going to be abandoned. There will be more effort of unilateralism, more so-called nationalism and protectionism. And as Marc has rightly pointed out, that there will be groups of countries, various kinds of groups would emerge, but that is not abandonment of globalization. A revisit is necessary. It will happen.
Multiplayer.
Yes, I call it multiplayer instead of multipolar because nobody is attracting. They are trying to consolidate the position. Yeah. That has been my position for the last 2 years or more, that I said that what is emerging is a multiplayer global system. And now the post-COVID, again, to echo what Marc has said, there will be these trade blocks here and there, but that does not mean the abandonment or complete destruction of the globalization in future, not in near future, absolutely not.
Marc, globalization relies on complex links, global value chains that connect producers across multiple countries. COVID-19 has severely disrupted these links. So my question to you is, will COVID-19 have a long-lasting impact on globalization? And what should be globalization's post-coronavirus prospects? How anti-globalization pressures affect features of the international business environment? Marc.
Well, I'm in complete agreement with Ali here. I think we have seen different phases of globalization in the past, and now we are entering into a new phase of globalization. It's not the end of globalization, but there's a paradigm shift. The paradigm under which we have been operating the world economy over the last, let's say, 20 or 30 years, you could call it efficiency, just in time. And now we're going towards a paradigm which is resilience, just in case. I think the lesson that we have learned before COVID already, but COVID has really brought home the point, is that there is too much instability in these very long, very complex supply chains. And I think they will be shortened and made less complex. There will be certainly some diversification. You already see that happening. South Korea is doing it. Japan is doing it. Europe starts doing it right now. So you do not put all your eggs in one basket. And you will, unfortunately, and that's going to be a huge problem for countries like Bangladesh, you see that you will cut out the greatest factor of instability, which is humans. So you will see an acceleration, a new push for automation, digital automation, robotization, artificial intelligence, algorithms, and so on, in order to become independent from such things as pandemics, but also trade wars, protectionism, power supply chains, like all of the big problems. So I think there is going to be a new logic looking from an investor's point of view. When in the past you had this huge savings in labor cost when you went to countries like China in the past and now maybe Bangladesh now. Now you have to counterweigh that with all the insecurities, potential disruptions, and additional costs that you have to face. And more investors come to the conclusion that it's not worth it. So when we've seen a paradigm of offshoring for the last 30 years, we are now seeing a reshoring, onshoring, and nearshoring. Means that Japan, for instance, is now not only putting all its investments into China, but is also looking into the Philippines, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and India. Means that probably Europe, industrial powers like Germany, will have a more intense look at shortening their supply lines towards Eastern Europe. Means that the United States will certainly have another look of shortening its supply lines by putting them into Mexico and other countries nearby. I think this is the new phase that we're going into in globalization. If I were in Bangladesh, this would worry me very much, because you are on the receiving end of this trend. And the question is, will the investments that you need for your development still be coming? And will the markets that you need for your products still be open?
So, Marc,
this is Zilur, if I may. I mean, this is a very important point that Marc brought up, and I think that needs to be explored. And I haven't seen much in the context of Bangladesh or South Asia in general that Marc has brought up. It is fact that what is going to do two things which are related, which Marc has pointed out. One is this robotization that is going to happen, cutting short the supply chain. That means the labor-intensive part. Look at the garments industry in Bangladesh or elsewhere. That what we have seen, the labor-intensive part would actually be limited. Whether it is in Bangladesh or outside, it would be limited. That means there would be a huge loss of job opportunity all around the world, because the automation and the robotization would bring in. That is a threat. That is a threat to the economic development or the source of the revenues that Bangladesh, for example, have been seeing it. On the other hand, what Marc has also pointed out, where to invest? Is it going to be, if it is coming out of China, we're not going to put all the eggs on the one basket, that's fine. Where do we put that money? Is it going to go to Bangladesh, or is it going to go to somewhere else? Is it Europe bringing back its own money at home, which Marc described as inshore? So this is the transition point. This is something that is going to be at the forefront of the restructuring of economy. How do you automation, robotization, because you want to reduce the uncertainty. Resilience is the point, and if you want to reduce the uncertainty, how do you do it? This is the economic restructuring I see, to my understanding, and which would have impact. Of course, it should have other impact, political and social, but how that is going to happen, how soon, I think it would be soon after the process would start. I think it has already started to some extent, but it would actually be quite, in a quite a remarkable speed that we will see these changes are taking place in coming years. I'm not talking about decade, I'm talking about years in this economic, arena. These changes would be coming.
Marc, where the global leaders should focus to normalize the globalization's trajectory? What do you think?
Well, I mean, these trends are real, I think, and you already see that a lot of development planners are now trying to counteract the trends. You see that China is already changing its development model, going away from the extreme dependence on export and trying more to take advantage of its enormous domestic consumer market. Of course, we are also seeing an extreme push to climb up the global value chain, because the lower on the receiving end you are on the global value chains, the more vulnerable you actually are. So I think it's very important to not just wait and see how these trends are going to play out. I think I completely agree with Ali Riaz here, that we only see the beginning, but this will be accelerating enormously because the decisions are being made right now, and you will see the effects in 2 or 3 years. But then it's too late. So I can only recommend to think very hard about the development model, and if it's still operational in the new global environment that we're going to see.
Professor Riaz, apart from political and economic consequences, there are many far-reaching social consequences of this pandemic. What kind of severe crises the war-torn countries may face during post-COVID period, and what problems might arise with refugees in the aftermath of the pandemic? Professor Riaz.
Refugees will be at the receiving end. They have always been. Unfortunately, this situation would actually create more devastation and devastating experience for them. And it is very unfortunate. Millions and millions of people are going to be affected. Because if you look at the last 6 months, particularly since March, the refugee question has been put on the back burner. Even not in the back burner. With the resource constraint, will there be a fatigue? If there are not fatigue, then will they completely be out of agenda? This is where the human rights activists needs to, emphasize that we simply cannot ignore the millions and millions of refugees. In case of Bangladesh, it is the Rohingyas. We see millions who are in Turkey, who have fled Syria and Iraq, and all those other places. So that is going to be very much a question that needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, at this point, I don't see that is happening. So the central point in reshaping is how do we envision the future, and who actually decides that one. I mentioned at the very beginning that the multilateral institutions such as WHO has not performed well. And will there be a reshaping of the multilateral organization? That is another thing. Insofar as the social implications are, one thing is the social cohesion. Will there be a adverse impact on the social cohesion? The way we have tried to practice, not necessarily everywhere it has succeeded. In many cases of the United States, the recent surge is basically not following the social distancing. But the social distancing, the very idea that my life depends on you, actually your life depends on me, but we have seen people think that, okay, I should be away from you because you might be carrying the virus. And also this cohesiveness of the society might actually be weakened. It has been weakened. Now, whether that would come together or would keep on depending on the technology to talk to each other instead of sitting in your studio, whether the people would be talking from home. But most importantly, the neighborhood, the schools, the parents-teachers association, the social organization which brings together, whether it is Rotary Club or something, and all these things, the social cohesiveness that we saw, whether that would be impacted is a very vital thing. At this point, it is too early to make that decision. It is too early to make any judgment. I'm not going to predict anything, but this would be an issue that needs to be, and it will be, in the forefront in how we rebuild the social and economic structures, not to mention the political structure within various states and in the global arena.
And do you think gender discrimination and racism will be increased significantly in the society in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, that would depend on whether we can stop it. The notion, when I talked about the xenophobic nationalism that has been spreading, Europe and United States has become pretty much the showcase of how the xenophobia can actually be used. The populist leaders in United States, Mr. Trump particularly, we have seen the rise of the white supremacists in the past 4-5 years. It has been ongoing, but again, the election of Mr. Trump has allowed, in some ways encouraged, these supremacist ideas. We have seen that in Europe. These populist leaders thrive on the idea of xenophobia. So the race would be at the front and center. In Europe, in my judgment, Mark can be in a better position to tell us more. But it is going to be not only in Europe or in the United States. It's going to be elsewhere too. And with respect to the gender dimension, the women are at the intersection of various kind of marginal position. And on the one hand, they're economically deprived. They have been, now the economic downturn has affected them most. They are, in many cases, are very powerless. And now that this patriarchy and other social system is now impinging on them. And then we have seen the rise of the gender-based violence, at home and elsewhere. So pretty much as women tends to be at the receiving end, at the bottom of the ladder of the economy, social power, and then this has created, the COVID-19 situation has created a perfect storm for those who are on the bottom. So if you are at the bottom of the ladder because you are from certain race, then imagine the persons of color in the United States if you are a woman. Or similarly, if you are poor and marginalized in the ethnic, indigenous community in Bangladesh, how you are going to face this kind of thing. All these things are the challenges that we will have to face. Again, time and again, Zilur, I'm like a broken record. I'm telling you that COVID has not created them. Let us not mix it up. It has accelerated. It has put us on. Let us think that this is the situation. It has been there. Let us try to address it as soon as practically possible.
Mark, any comments on this?
Okay. Well, maybe I can take that back to South Asia. And as you mentioned in the beginning, I've been living and working in India, your neighbor. And let's talk about the politics or the political economy of race and gender and caste for a second. A country like India, and I think it's very similar to Bangladesh in that regard, has been extremely aspirational. There has been strong economic growth for decades now. Millions have been lifted out of poverty. The middle classes are growing, and there is a sense that things are just getting better and better. And now you have a labor market which, due to the growth of the population, grows by 1 million people per month. So you need to create 1 million jobs per month for the next 30 years. So you will be shocked if I tell you how much jobs India is actually creating with more than 7% growth and some of the highest investment rates in the entire world. Zero. Nada. Nothing. They do not create a single job per month. So the question, and that is before COVID. Now the situation has been much, much, much worse. So the question is, how does this affect the politics if the aspiration for a better future is taken out of the equation and the cake is not getting bigger? And I think what you already see is the return of communal politics. You basically play out one community against the other. And unfortunately, this is a trend that we have been seeing in many, many countries around the world, Latin America, Turkey, Russia, you've seen it in India. And I think, the less economic growth you have, and I mean growth for livelihoods that people can actually build a future upon, right? The more really toxic communal politics you will get.
This toxicity is going to increase. The toxicity in various ways is going to increase. In case of India, it would be the anti-Muslim, this Islamophobic idea that is being churned out by the Modi regime, that under the so-called democratic pretense, what we have seen in recent days also. So, and in case of United States, the resistance that has grown, I'm very optimistic that this resistance against the Black Lives Matter movement would at least put a break on this situation, at least put a roadblock in what we have seen. But it is going to go on. In many ways, these are structural, but it would get more intensified in South Asia and elsewhere, in the Middle East as well.
For final remarks, I have a few questions for both of you. What will be the actual scenario of the post-COVID era? What kind of positive and or negative impact is it going to bring to the universe? And what type of political polarization can be seen in the aftermath of COVID-19? Marc Saxer.
Well, I think we have been, reporting, unfortunately, and I think, we have to report it because these things, I think, are true.
Yeah.
But it's very pessimistic. So at least try me to say something more optimistic in the end. I think there is a great opportunity, and Riaz has mentioned that there has been a neoliberal development model in place for the last 30, 40 years. And we have now seen that this model is not working. We see that in many societies around the world, certainly in Europe, people and growing majorities are there to say, okay, let's sit back and stop this. We need to really invest more in public services. The policy of austerity has run its course. We need to get away from our obsession with export, and we need to put some money in the pockets of the consumers. The idea that the state is a problem and needs to be cut back or even destroyed is losing credibility. On the contrary, we see that people turn towards the state in order to protect them in crises like COVID-19. So I think we are at a point where not only a lot of risks are there, but there is also lots of opportunities to rebuild the political economy, the development model on which our societies are built upon. And I think I see a lot of potential for a new broad societal alliance for some more progressive policies emerging there. But this needs to be brokered. This just doesn't happen automatically or by itself, but we actually need to stress the opportunity to do so and actually come around this new development model. And I think that the great opportunity there would be to really bring together the state, the industry, which is export-oriented, which is innovation-minded, the labor unions, the scientific community, as well as progressive groups, which, for instance, are marching for climate change protection, to bring all of them together under a new paradigm, which actually tries to use the capacity of the development model in order to bring progressive change. So I see this opportunity as well, and I hope that maybe that ends our show not on such a direly pessimistic note.
Anything else you would like to add?
No, I'd be interested to hear what Ali Riaz has to say.
Okay, thank you. Professor Ali Riaz.
There are three scenarios. If you stand as we are standing at the crossroads, as I think, there are three scenarios. One is the business as usual scenario. That is not going to happen. It's not going to return to the pre-COVID situation or even business as usual in the sense that it would be led by China instead of the United States. That is not going to happen. That is out of the way. What is the second option? Second option is the pessimistic one, de-globalization and back to 1960s, it's economy, the protectionism, unilateralism, and I don't think that is going to happen either because it has a serious drawback. People have learned from it. So what is left is the third scenario. What is the third scenario? It is the globalization with a new phase. And that is where you'll have to discard. First of all, you'll have to learn. And I think this is the moment of learning. Introspection. What have we learned? We have learned that the neoliberal economic policies have not delivered. But we have learned that we are actually extremely interdependent. The virus has spread, the way it has spread told us that how interconnected we are. Now, can you use that interconnectedness for betterment or actually taking down the drain? So what is going to be the future? The future needs to be a new kind of globalization with, human face to it, putting the human first. The development paradigm that Marc is talking about needs to be with effective mechanism for delivering to the people, the human security rather than simply thinking security as buying new weapon, inventing new weapon. It would require some sort of a change in the global system, particularly multilateral organizations need to be revisited. But equally important is the arrangement, the economic arrangements, the economic structure that has been in place since 1945, and particularly since 1990s or 1980s to be precise, with respect to this neoliberal economic policies that has not put public health, public education, or public goods at the forefront. That is the optimism that it is going to be changed. It's not going to be business as usual, and I don't think world can afford the very much rerun of deglobalization back to 1960s. So it leaves us with one potential. Now, what will happen? That not only depends on just wishful thinking, it depends on the active engagement. And that is where the civil society, the labor union, the private sector, the state, and the international community need to work together. I hope that would be the case, and that is the optimism I can share. I'm still optimistic. At the end of the day, Zelur, I am very much optimistic. Change will come, and change will come for the betterment of the human community rather than for few people.
Thank you, Professor Ali Riaz. Thank you, Mr. Marc Saxer. Thank you for being with us. The novel coronavirus pandemic can be the moment the world pushes back against fear and isolationism and turns instead towards hope, solidarity, and a shared community. People seek out a light at the end of the tunnel and work to show to each other that we all stand together. Moreover, responding to the pandemic is not just about rectifying a long-standing crisis, but also about building a resilient world in the interest of everyone. Good luck and goodbye.